It is 2024, I'm Annie, and I'll be here today to tell you my favourite books of 2023, the year that has now ended. I'll be going through a ranked top 10 list, as well as fast mentioning 10 honourable mentions, because as I read over 100 books last year, I don't think I can be happy with mentioning just 10 books, because it was already hard enough to actually make that top 10 list. So without further ado, I'll be starting with just going through my honourable mentions of last year. Those honourable mentions, not in any particular order, were Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, Sorrows of a Young Werther by Goethe, We Spread by Iain Reid, Heaven by Mieko Kawakami, Blessing the Boat by Lucille Clifton, Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert, A Doe's House by Henrik Ibsen, as well as The Stand by Stephen King, Star by Yukio Mishima, and the One Piece series, or the Barate arc in particular. Now that we have got that out of the way, I think we can jump into talking about my actual top 10. My number 10 favourite book of last year is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley. Actually solidifying my 10th favourite book was really difficult, but when I reread some of the things I've marked in here, I rediscovered just what a wonder this book is. In this book we follow these two sisters who live in this castle, this house, this village where everyone kind of hates them for reasons we are not quite certain of. People think they're weird, and then their cousin moves in and we kind of follow what happens. The two sisters are orphans, so something has happened, and they live with their uncle, and this is just a wonderfully, beautifully bizarre depiction of grief and of, I think most of the book really deals with what is it like to be an outsider, and not just within a certain place, but like even within your family and even within yourself. It's a book that really called to me and really touched to me, but it did so especially through the absolutely wonderful narrative style and prose of Shirley Jackson. The story itself isn't really odd, it's just the way that our main character narrates it and the stuff that we focus on that makes it quirky, I think. And I think that just really adds to the charm of it. It is really charming story, but it's also quite sad, and it is quite dark as well. It's just a wonderfully wonderful story that I don't know what to say about, because I think for the most of reading through this book I was just in awe. The quote that they have here is just this is absolutely wonderful, and it really captures the book really wonderfully. My name is Mary Catherine Blackwood. I'm 18 years old and I live with my sister Constance. I've often thought that with any luck at all, I could have been born a werewolf, because the two middle fingers on both of my hands are the same length, but I have had to be content with what I had. I dislike washing myself and dogs and noise. I like my sister Constance and Richard Plantagenet and Amanita phalloides, the death cup mushroom. Everyone else in my family is dead. It is kind of like this fairy tale vibey, darker, contemplative, nothing happens but it's beautiful and charming and odd type of literature that really captures me really wonderfully. My number 9th book is a really recent read. That is The Outsider by Albert Camus. I have got a love and hate relationship with Camus. I also read The Fall this year, or last year, and I didn't like that. This is a modern classic. In it we follow a man who loses his mother and doesn't much feel anything about it, and then he ends up committing a random act of violence on a beach. And yeah, it's about that, but nothing really happens, and most of the first part is taken up by just a lot of description. It is just describing Algiers. Is that how you pronounce it? And the second part is more contemplative, and it basically follows his trial. It doesn't basically follow his trial, it follows his trial. This is a work of philosophical absurdism, and I am a major fan of absurdism. I'm a major fan of existentialism in general. I am a philosophy major. Wow, you've got to mention that at least once. That does give context to why I loved it, but also why I could have hated it, because when I read it, I mentioned it to my classmates, most of whom had read it, and the reactions ranged from that is one of my favourite books of all time to that is absolute garbage. That is kind of a red flag that you're liking it. And yeah, it is kind of a red flag, but it's not. And I talked to a friend of mine whose favourite book this is afterwards, and I'm like, it's not a red flag. I get why it's a red flag, but the people who kind of have red flagified this book misunderstand it. And I could go on a rant, but I'm not gonna. It's a beautiful depiction of how society views difference in a very absurd way. I literally had to cut the camera because I didn't know how to wrap up my thoughts about The Outsider, so I'm just going to read you a quote from my journal. It's that absurdity and world's hostility, denialism and being an outsider that Camus depicts so wonderfully. To me, the vivid descriptions are at the heart of the work because truly they do matter more, as well as are in a lot of ways a reflection and a representation of us humans and our messy bloody lives and emotions. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's great. At number 8, we have got Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell. This is such a beautifully captivating, unique story. In it we follow a ghost of a girl who died in the 17th century, I believe, and the story takes place in the 19th century. A family of sorts moves in near the monastery where this ghost resides, and she just kind of follows them throughout the entire narrative, and sometimes we get glimpses to her past. But this ghost is also omniscient and omnipresent, so she can actually see through the thoughts of other people, and not just through their thoughts and into their minds, but into their pasts as well as their futures. It's a type of a narration that I've never read before, and it's a very close story, and this character, oddly enough, gets closer to the characters than in a normal narrative, even though she doesn't actually ever get to interact with the other characters in the the current timeline. It's just a very beautiful story, and I'm now thinking, should it have been higher? Maybe, I don't know, but this is where it's at now. I love all these books. It captivated this essence of being lost and still trying to find yourself, even though you've been alive for centuries, but because you will always remain just this not even an image or a memory, because nobody really knows who you are anymore. Nobody even knows that you existed, even though you continue existing. And there is such a sad beauty to it, but it also deals with a lot with hope and losing hope and kind of looking to your future and what you could do, and that loss of potential. There's something about this work that really spoke to me as an artist, but also as a lost woman in my 20s, as an individual who is looking for a lot and is afraid that she will never find that much. My number 7 book is a book that I do own physically and I did annotate, but the moment my friend told me he likes postmodernism, I asked, had he read this book? He said no, so I just kind of went, you need to read this book. And that is If on a Winter's Night, a Traveller by Italo Calvino. Is it one of the best books ever written? I would say so. This book is bloody brilliant. And my friend was laughing to me because he started reading it and he was like, your annotations, they are quite something, because literally I think most of my annotations within this book are, Calvino, you are a genius. Calvino, I hate you. What is this book about? You buy a copy of If on a Winter's Night, a Traveller and you start reading it. And then we jump into this story that the man starts reading. If on a Winter's Night, a Traveller. And then that ends because there's a problem with the copy. And he goes back to the bookstore because he's like, or you go back to the bookstore, but the narrator goes back to the bookstore, gets another copy of If on a Winter's Night, a Traveller, starts reading it. We again jump into this narrative, but it's not If on a Winter's Night, a Traveller. It's a completely different book. He goes and tries to find the actual If on a Winter's Night, a Traveller. And we jump back and forth between the story itself, which is narrated in a second person point of view, and between these stories that the character starts. And the brilliant part is all of those narratives within this narrative are absolutely brilliant. They are absolutely incredible beginnings to other works that you'd never get to read, which is the problem of the main character as well. But then there's also this completely other narrative, which is the narrative itself, which deals with a woman and an author and all this shenanigans, and it's really weird, and I wouldn't say it's absurdist, but it's surreal, it's very postmodern, it's very on your face, and it's very meta. It's meta with not even a capital M, just kind of all capital letters, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. I would say it's probably one of the best books I've ever read. Then we have got a book from an author whom I read last year, and whose book was one of my least favourite books of last year, and that is If Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra. This book is beautifully terrific, beautifully crimson, beautifully horrendous. It is a horror fairy tale. It is kind of a retelling, not even a kind of, it is a retelling of A Little Mermaid, which is a fairy tale I don't really care for. In it we follow the mermaid as well as a plague doctor and their adventure. Adventures might be the wrong word. I would definitely compare this to Crimson Peak, which is one of my favourite films of all time. It's less of a horror story and more a gothic love story. And it's one of the most beautifully, uniquely written books I've ever read. The prose in here is probably one of my favourites of all time. I just need to read you a quote. Estuaries of wine that taste on my tongue of the tiger and the sea. Salt and soil grow rich on the depth. Of trout excessively seasoned. Of my palm on the plague doctor's cheek, of futures foreshortened, of a kiss that never was, and all at once I am drowning in loss, and I need them to stay, no matter the price. I'd slice my larynx clean, make soup of the ribbons, I'd peel away word from my vocabulary. I don't need to say anything else. It probably is my favourite written book of all time. It's just absolutely beautiful, and it made me cry. It got to my heart, and I kind of want to reread it immediately. Just beautifully haunting. Talking about beautifully haunting, but in a completely different way, we have got my fifth book of 2023, and that is 2001 A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. This is in my top 3 films of all time, and now it is maybe my favourite sci-fi book of all time. I wanted to study physics since I understood what bloody hell physics was. I'm not studying physics at the minute, but I am doing physics as a minor. And one thing I really love about physics is the awe of it. It's the absolutely wonderful ununderstanding, not ever being able to understand, but trying, and the beauty, but the hauntingly terrifying beauty of the universe. And 2001 just captures it absolutely like nothing I've ever read. In it, humanity find a monument on the moon. It is receiving a message from near Jupiter, so they send an expedition, and it is a very quiet, nothing happens look at the concept of us not being alone in the world. I don't even need to say nothing else, because that is it, and that is exactly why I loved it. It's haunting in its awe. And I think no other book has ever depicted my feeling and my love for this. I just realised that my necklace is beneath here. That is a bit sad, but let's continue. Nothing has ever depicted my awe and kind of that wonder and that curiosity that drives me in what I want to study, that drives me as a human being better than this work. At number 4 position, we have got Candide or Optimism by Voltaire. It's kind of become a meme that Voltaire is my favourite philosopher, but the first thing I read of Voltaire was actually only this year. Did I know who Voltaire was? Yes. Had I heard some things about him? Certainly. But this year I read Candide or Optimism, which follows the adventure of this person called Candide, in which all these horrific things happen, and a lot of it deals with the philosophical theory, the philosophy made up by Leibniz called optimism, which just basically means that we live in the best of possible worlds and everything is, so it is good. Or everything is good because it is. And Voltaire did not like that theory, so he satirised it in quite a few places, but especially here. And it's done so wonderfully. And I personally am just like a major fan of satire, but also like making fun of philosophy. No, but just like philosophical themes within narratives, especially comical or satirical narratives. It is so brilliant. You just keep on going, like with If on a Wondrous Night, a Traveller, you just keep on going. You're too clever and it's annoying and I absolutely love it. People need to talk about Voltaire more. Voltaire was a fun dude. And I know some people are like, yeah, but was he, you know, that important of a philosopher? He's more of a meme. But he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. And read Voltaire, and Candide is just, it's fun, but it's also smart, and it's also just like, it's stellar. Cultivate your garden, darlings. I don't think we will ever even, but we got worse. Anyways, my third favourite book of 2023 is Howl, Kaddish and Other Poems by Allen Ginsberg. That is not how. I have mentioned it quite a few times that Allen Ginsberg probably being my favourite poet of all time is kind of my red flag. And, you know, as we've seen kind of with this top 10 list, I've got quite a few red flags. Is this the worst of them? Maybe. But his poetry has just spoken to me like nothing else. I've cried. I've literally shaked. I have just been captivated, been put in awe. And most importantly, it's just my own art has had such an influence. I don't know what I can really say about poetry, except, you know, what I've just said. But just know that this is the poetry that speaks to me the most. He talks about themes that are at the core of me, but in a way that really understand me and hold a mirror to me and just kind of get to me. He has this very kind of frank, honest, weird, absurd at times style of writing poetry. It's very kind of hitting. That doesn't make any sense. But it's very sharp in its delivery, but in this very late night, early morning, tired or tipsy kind of way. I've mentioned this quite a few times, but Desertic Acid might be my favourite poem of all time. And I just made a video of my favourite books of all time, within which I included the previous book as well, but also this, and that is the Aenied or the Iain by Virgil. This is a work of epic poetry, and it might be the best work of fiction that I've ever read. I did not expect that I would love it. I thought I would, you know, maybe enjoy it. And then there was a point in here where I just went, whoa. He was describing this scene of war. I just started like feeling like it got to me emotionally, and I was like, what is going on? It's like Virgil really understood humanity. Fleeing the ashes of Troy, Aeneas, Achilles' mighty foe in the Iliad, begins an incredible journey to fulfill his destiny. Wow, that's what it's about. And it's just so beautifully written. Virgil was a poet, and I talked about this a bit more at length in my favourite books of all time videos. I'm not gonna chat about this a lot, but it's just some of the most beautifully written and captivating and emotionally impactful, and just passages that understood us as humans and our complexity like almost no one ever has. I want to meet this man. He died 2,000 years ago, but I want to meet this man. That's what I think about it. What is my favourite book of 2023? I didn't say this rule, but there's a reason why a bit of rule on this list, which is I can only mention a single book by an author or from a series, and that is because otherwise I think 4 books from this series that I finished this year would have been in my top 10, and I'm not even joking. And that is The Sandman by Neil Gaiman, but the book I've chosen as my favourite book is Brief Lives, which is volume 7, I think. This is my favourite series of all time. Spoiler if you want to go watch that favourite books of all time video. Neil Gaiman writes to me, and the Sandman series, it's the most beautiful and understanding depiction of a single character and the study of a single character that I've ever read. There was no coherence in that sentence, but I think you got my point. It's just beautiful, and it is incredibly written. We follow the Sandman, the dream, the king of dreams, million names for him, Morpheus. Brief Lives is a volume I think captures the themes and executes both the plot and the character study of not just Sandman, but all the side characters. Everything is found in Brief Lives that is beautiful and wonderful about the Sandman. But the second last volume, or really the climax of the story of the Sandman, the kindly ones, is it perhaps even better executed than Brief Lives? I don't know, but it's the best ending that I've ever read, and I call that the ending because really the wake, that is the final volume, is an epilogue, and I like that even more than I like the kindly ones, because one thing that Neil Gaiman does like no one else is the way he executes epilogues, aftermath, the fallout. And then there is the overture, which is a prelude to the Sandman, and it's the last thing that is written, is the last thing you will read. It's like it's all a great circle of eternity, and just, I can't put it into words, but Neil Gaiman, within this work, he captures emotions, he captures those little themes about us as human beings, about us as individuals, by looking at something that is so much greater than us, that is something we can't really ever understand, but it shows how something that is great is always also something that is small, and how something small is always also something that is great. How vastness of the universe is really found within what is nearest to us. It's my favorite thing I've read this year. This is probably my favorite thing I've perhaps ever read. And that is my number one book. Sandman Brief Lives, though I've talked about 4 bloody volumes in that series, because they all belong in my top 10. Genuinely, I think that's it. That is my list of top 10 books I read in 2023. I do want to give a shout out to 3 rereads of 2023 that I wouldn't have necessarily called my favorite books of all time, or my favorite books before 2023, but after my reread of them, they became that. And those books are The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, and After Dark by Haruki Murakami, which is actually the last book I read in 2023, or finished in 2023. And that's it. Those were my favourite books I read last year. I kept on thinking throughout the year that this was just a very weird reading year, that, you know, I didn't read that much that was absolutely brilliant. I actually read a lot of just brilliant books, and I'm looking forward to 2024 being even a better reading year. Tell me your favourite book of last year, because I need some recommendations. I already actually read my first read of 2024, which was a 5-star read, so it's starting out wonderfully. But that's it. That's everything from me. Happy 2024, goodbye, and see you again.